Hi, my name is Ashley and I'm a mom of 2 little girls. I have a 3.5-year-old named Kylie and I also have a 19-month-old named Mia. Now the holidays are almost upon us, and even during times of a global pandemic, I know there are still going to be lots of people who are traveling to visit family and friends. And if you are a Montessori parent, then you might very well right now be finding yourself wondering exactly how you're going to Montessori while traveling still. So from one busy parent to another, today I'm going to be sharing with you some realistic tips for staying true to your Montessori values the best that you can while traveling with your little ones. So before you even bust out your packing list, I want you to take a step back for a moment and just really think for a second about what your goals are for raising your child in a Montessori home. You're likely trying to provide them with as much independence as possible. You are trying to give them freedom within limits. And you're also trying to be respectful of their perceptions and their needs as it relates to daily life. So if we apply those principles to what's happening while we're traveling with our child, then what we need to do becomes a little bit more clearer. And so it really comes down to those 3 primary things. How can you provide your child with as much independence as possible while you're in the car, or while you're on the plane, or while you're staying at your family's house? And how can you provide them freedom within limits? And obviously those limits are going to be different depending on the type of travel that you are taking and how long the travel is going to be and your child's age and temperament. There are so many different factors, but they do still need to have to experience some of the freedom that they normally have just within these new parameters. And then of course, how can we still be respectful of our child's perception, their experience of what's happening during this travel period and what special needs they might have that they don't normally have because they're adjusting to what's going on. Because for very young children who are used to this predictability of what happens each day at home, we've basically gone and turned the whole thing up on its head. And that takes some getting used to for them. So how can we be respectful of their needs during that process? So ultimately, what it comes down to is your level of flexibility. You know, on the outside, for people who are not very familiar with Montessori philosophy, they see it as this very rigid set of ideals that cannot be broken, that it has to be done in a certain lockstep manner, otherwise it's not the real thing. And at its heart, that's not what Montessori is about. Montessori is about following your child's lead. It's about keenly observing them and being attuned to what their needs are and then responding accordingly. So if you can remember that while also remaining flexible, because this is a temporary situation after all, then I think you're going to feel like your trip is a lot more smooth and not quite as stressful. The bottom line is that you are not going to mess up your child or mess up the way you have things set up at home simply because you took a break from it for a week to go on vacation. That's not going to happen. So if that's a fear that you have, then I give you permission to just get rid of that fear right now, wipe it out of your mind, because it's not reality. Children are very resilient, and as soon as your child is back at home in their normal environment, after a few days, things will normalize again and it will be right back to the way that it was. Now, that all aside, I know that you are likely still hoping for some practical tips and things to pack, activity ideas, things like that for while you are traveling, and I have not forgotten about that. So I'm going to start off with what I feel like is the simplest of travel scenarios, and that is a car trip. Now, if you are going on a very short car trip, say just on one errand or a couple of errands in the afternoon, and you're just wondering, is there anything special that I can do? I would say not really. Maybe pack your child's favorite book or a favorite toy or a snack if they're old enough to be having snacks in the back seat safely, and kind of call it at that. The trip is likely to not upset your child too much because of the fact that they will have an opportunity to get out of the car at some short interval of time after having gotten in. I am sensitive to the fact that some children, especially younger babies, really do not like being in their car seat, even if it's just for 5 minutes, because one of my girls is like that, and I get it. It's not easy, but the best that you can do is what I said, you know, pack their little bit of favorites, pack a snack if you can, and just kind of hope for the best. At some point, it's going to come down to your child may just need to be kindly but firmly placed into their car seat and strapped in, and they may cry about it and express their dislike for the situation. And you as the parent, you know that that's the safest place for them while they're in the car. And so you're just going to have to empathize with their feelings. I know you really don't want to be in the car seat right now. I get it. We're going to be at the store in 5 minutes, and then you'll have a chance to get out and we'll go walking around and we'll have a lot of fun. And just kind of leave it at that. There's really not much more that you can do about a child who hates being in their car seat. I know in the moment it might not feel respectful, but sometimes the most respectful thing doesn't necessarily feel that way. And in this case, their safety is the most respectful thing for them. So get them in there, strap them in, empathize if they don't like it, offer some of their favorite things to try to occupy them or redirect them, stay away from screen time or anything battery operated if at all possible, and hopefully the crying doesn't last too long. Now, if you are on a much longer car trip, say you are taking a road trip across the country somewhere to visit family and friends or to see a particular destination, and your child is going to be in the car seat for a very long time, then there are some things that you can do to help mitigate the potential disaster that might happen if your child does not like being in the car seat for that long. I would say starting out, as far as packing things, same thing as a short car trip. Just a couple of favorite books, a couple of favorite toys, snacks if it's appropriate, and just make sure that you have enough of that packed for the potential length of your car trip. When it comes to toys and activities and things that you can pack to try to help keep your child entertained in the car that do not involve a screen, I would say keep it minimal. You don't need to bring a giant bag of things with you. I mean, you certainly can if you want to, but you don't really need to. For both of my girls, the only things that we ever brought or still bring in the car with us now for car trips are just like favorite board books, a favorite stuffed animal if there is one, this little elephant crinkle taggy toy that my first daughter got when she was like 3 months old. Even my second one, she still loves that thing. There's this Fifi Firefly toy that I found on Amazon that has like a bunch of little things on it for babies to play with. And then we had a set of these little car keys that are meant for babies. Like all the edges are smoothed out, but yet they're still made of metal, so they feel like real keys to your baby. And those things were always more than enough to keep my girls entertained during the times that they were awake and content to be awake and not unhappy about being in the car seat. Do your best to try to stay away from screen time if at all possible, especially for children under the age of 2, because research has shown it's just not very good for their brains at that early on in life. So try to steer clear of that. But I would also like to say that if that is the only saving grace that you have and your child is having none of it for any of the other reinforcements that you have packed or the other things that you have thought of to help calm your child down about this car trip, then I would say you're not a horrible parent for having them have a little bit of screen time while they're in the car. But do your best to make that your last resort. Now, if you feel like you've tried everything and your child is still really upset, then the best thing that I can say you can do, and you have this freedom because you're driving, is to pull over. Go to a gas station, take your child in to use the restroom if they're, using the restroom at that age, or just let them meander around a rest area with your supervision for a little bit. Just let them get a little bit of energy out before you pack them back up in the car to go again. And they might be resistant about getting back in, or they might feel a little bit recharged and ready to go, and you'll be good for another section of your trip. And finally, the one thing that I feel like you have on your side when it comes to long car trips is that many children, especially when they're really young, tend to be very sleepy when they're in the car. And so many times they will just fall asleep. And if that happens, then that's awesome, because let's say your trip is only 4 hours and your child sleeps for an hour or an hour and a half out of that car trip, then that's a nice chunk of your time that has now been taken care of and that you don't have to worry about it. So if that happens, then count your lucky stars. That's one of the good things that can happen on a long car trip. And I'm offering all of these tips about car trips to you from firsthand experience, because when I moved out here 3 years ago, my husband and I actually drove from San Diego to Denver, Colorado with a 2-month-old in the back seat. And she was not happy about it at all. She was definitely not one of those kids that just loved being in the car seat and didn't really seem to mind. It was totally content just watching the trees go by. Totally not her. So I had to pull every trick out of the book, and we stopped many, many times just to let her get out and have a little stretch before we got back in to do another section of the trip. And I can tell you that we survived. The time eventually does end, so hang in there. I know it can be tough, but it's definitely doable. So the next type of travel scenario is a plane trip or a train trip. I feel like the two of those are kind of the same because of the environment. You are not stuck behind the driver's seat of a car. You have the freedom to get up and move about with your child. And then you also have the limitation of the fact that there are other passengers that you need to be aware of. So as far as things to pack for your child on a long plane or a train trip, I always start with snacks because children love to eat and they're going to get hungry at some point, especially if it's a long trip. So think of all their favorites, pack all of those. I also try to bring along a couple of extra little goodies that they might not ordinarily get to help distract them if I need an emergency something to pull out of the diaper bag. So that's another option for you. And I also try to pack something that is going to help them to equalize their ears, especially on a plane going up and down on the ascent and the descent, because they don't quite know how to do the yawning trick or the swallowing thing that they need to do to help pop their ears, and they might become physically uncomfortable by that sensation. Even if it's not hurting, they might still cry just because it feels funny to them. So some ideas for you would be, if you're breastfeeding, then breastfeed your child all the way up and then all the way back down again. I did that with my first daughter and it worked like a charm, and she also went to sleep, which was even better. If your baby takes a bottle, then go ahead and pack a bottle for the ascent and pack a bottle for the descent. This way they can be drinking during that time. For slightly older babies and toddlers who are eating solid foods and they can have little tiny snacks, you might consider bringing along something like those little fruit melts, because they tend to suck on them a little bit and it takes them a little bit longer to eat just the one. So you can have a little handful ready or a small little cup ready and just let them eat one at a time during the entire ascent or during the entire descent. And that worked really well for me with my daughter the second time we took her traveling on a plane. And then I've also heard, I haven't tried this yet, but with a slightly older child, that lollipops work wonders. As far as activities go to pack for a plane or a train trip, I would say starting out, some of the base core things that you would normally bring for a car trip would be the same for a plane or a train trip. So think about any stuffed animals or favorite dolls that your child has, or any type of comfort object. If they have any favorite books at all, especially the touch and feel board books or things with flaps, things that keep them busy while you're reading. If your child has any particular toys just that occupy them for a while, like some of the little car toys that I mentioned earlier. And if you have an older child who is able to do little small activities or manipulatives, and there are all kinds of little Montessori friendly toys and activities that you can easily just slip in your bag and take with you, like the little threading cheese block. That's a really good one. Or maybe a small number of little magnetiles for your child to work with. Or one of those little felt play sets, like a little felt storyboard, or a small wooden chunky puzzle. There are literally an endless amount of things that you can take with you that are totally fine and take on a plane or a train trip as long as it fits in your bag. I will actually see if I can find a blog post that someone has written, because I know that they exist, on ideas for some of these different types of toys and activities that you can consider packing. And I will put that in the description box for you in case you're interested. And as I said earlier, with car trips, especially if you are a screen-free home, you really want to try to save screen time for last or not at all. Keep it as your last resort if, for example, you've tried everything else and your child is just causing a scene and disturbing some of the other passengers on board. There's really only so much that you can do in the way of apologizing and trying to let them know that you're trying to take care of it the best that you can. Sometimes people just get very ornery and upset about crying children in confined spaces, and so you might have to resort to something like that as an emergency action plan if necessary. And if that happens, I do not want you to feel guilty about it. Again, it is a temporary situation. You're not going to melt your child's brain in the hour they spend on the iPad until they fall asleep or whatever the case may be. You're not a bad parent, and you are not undoing all of the efforts that you have made to create a Montessori environment for your child. It is a fleeting moment in time, and again, things will go back to normal. If you're finding that your child is getting really antsy, maybe they're not crying yet, but they're just kind of antsy and they're not sitting still and they're climbing all over the place on your lap or your partner's lap if you're traveling with somebody, then I would suggest just get up, get out of your seat, take your child for a walk down the aisle to the bathroom, or just walk up and down the aisles if there isn't a lot of traffic and you're able to safely walk during that part of the trip. Just get them up and let them stretch their legs a little bit. Sometimes the flight attendants are on a plane are even nice enough that they'll let you kind of go into the back area, and maybe they'll like show them something cool, or they'll let them look and peer into the back area just to provide that momentary distraction, because they see it all the time. They understand, and sometimes they have little tricks that they can pull out that will help you. So you can always ask for their help if you really think it might be of assistance to you. But otherwise, the more chances you can offer your child to get up and just stretch for a little bit during the trip periodically, the better off they're going to be when you finally get them back to their seat. And then as far as sleeping, your child may or may not be traveling in a car seat, depending on whether or not you're on a plane or a train or how old they are. And so if you are having your child in a car seat and they don't like it, but you have a chance to let them out, then I say let them out. If they're content in their car seat, then great. If your child is not in a car seat, say they have their own plane seat, or maybe they're a small infant who doesn't need their own seat yet, and so you're holding them, then you kind of just have to make do with the sleeping arrangement as it happens. Your child might fall asleep on the seat or partially on your lap, or your infant might fall asleep in your arms, and I've been in that situation for several hours on a plane trip, and it's definitely an uncomfortable one. I was a bit achy by the time I was able to finally get up again. But if your child can sleep for any length of time during the trip, then that is a good thing. So take it when you can get it. And then one other thing that is particular to plane and train travel is this experience of walking through the airport with your child, or walking through the train station with your child. Unless they are a seasoned traveler that does it all the time, for many children, it doesn't happen all that often. And so it's an exciting experience for them every single time they go. So you can think ahead of time about how you can provide them with as much independence as possible during this part of the trip, and how you can offer them a little bit of freedom while still keeping them safe while you're going through the airport or through the train station, and how you can try to maintain your respect for their experience and their perceptions of what's going on during that part of the trip, even though you are likely going to be a little bit more stressed out. For much younger babies, it's very easy to just put them in a car seat or a stroller or a baby carrier and go through the airport that way. But if you have a child who is able to walk through an airport successfully with you without running off, then it might actually be a really fun thing for them to have their own little rolly suitcase or their own backpack that they can wear with some of their things for the trip in it, and that they can have the experience of feeling like a big kid and walking through that with you, and learning how to wait in line, and learning all of the different little things that go along with going through an airport or through a train station. The next travel scenario that we're talking about is staying in a hotel. So activities wise, I would still suggest all of the same things that you would pack for the car trip or pack for the plane or train trip that you probably already packed anyway to get to the hotel. So you can have all of those things on hand. If you really want to go crazy and you've got the luggage space, then you can pack some larger activities in your luggage that can then be opened up and used in the hotel room. So you can certainly do that, but you don't need to do that. I think your child honestly would be totally fine just having the things that you packed in your bag for the car or plane or train trip, and they would be totally fine. Not to mention, your child is probably going to be very preoccupied anyway with all of the new experiences that are happening. They have this brand new environment to explore in their hotel room, and then wherever it is that you guys are going outside of the hotel room, there's likely some activities that you have planned that you're going to be doing anyway. So a lot of their time is already going to be taken up, and they might not need as many of these things from home as you might think they do. As far as what to do about eating from a Montessori perspective while you're staying in a hotel room, I would say that that really depends on how long you're going to be staying there. If this is a very, very short trip, just a day or two for your child, then you might consider just not really worrying about what your normal routines are at home and just go with the flow, because again, kids are very flexible and you're not going to ruin it all. It's not really that big of a deal at the end of the day. So if it's a short trip, don't stress about it. Just do whatever you need to do while you're on the trip and just enjoy yourself. If it makes you feel better, you can certainly bring along a small child-sized set of silverware and one of their cups from home to have during meal times while you're at a restaurant, or if you're buying groceries and eating in your hotel room, that they can just have it during your normal family meal time just in the hotel. If you are staying for a much longer period of time, then I would suggest going ahead and doing that, making sure that you bring along their child-sized items with you just to help maintain that routine. And let's say that you are going on a longer trip, but you forget to pack these items. The world is not over. You do not need to run out to the store and try to find something similar for your child to use. It's really not a big deal. Your child will adapt, everything will be okay, and then life will continue as normal when you get home. The only reason that I suggest it is because kids are creatures of habit. And so any little piece of home that you can bring with you for an extended period of time is going to help them adjust a little bit more quickly. When it comes to sleeping arrangements in a hotel, you really have to feel out the situation and kind of assess what the room looks like when you first get there and base your decision off of that. Like, you can certainly have a plan in mind, but what it comes down to is the setup of the room. So I would say my process, if I were you, and this is what I do, is to go into the room and kind of assess the safety first, because safety is of utmost importance. Just some quick ideas for you based on my own experiences, things that I have actually done. If you are in a hotel room that you feel is relatively safe and you have the ability to create a floor bed for your child by, say, for example, pulling a mattress off of a pull-out couch and setting it up on the floor somewhere safe, if you can do that, then I would say go for it, because that's ideal. That's going to be the most like what your child is experiencing at home if they normally sleep in a floor bed. Alternatively, if you don't have the materials available in the room to create a makeshift floor bed, or say it's just not a very safe situation and you don't feel comfortable with it, then you can bring a pack and play or request a pack and play from the hotel. Typically they usually have something like that available, or like a mini crib. You can request that instead and then just have your child sleep there instead for the duration of your trip. And then if you are a co-sleeping family, then by all means have your child sleep right in the bed with you, and things will be just like they are at home, and your child will likely be none the wiser. So the moral of the story is it's going to be dependent on your situation, and it's kind of hard to plan for it ahead of time unless you've already been there before and you know what to expect. So remain flexible. For everything else, I would say just try to maintain similar routines that you have at home for the morning and for bedtime as kind of touch points for your child's day. This way they're kind of waking up to the same routine and that same feeling of predictability that will comfort them going into the day. And then of course your day is going to look a lot different because you're not at home, but then at night perhaps you can still have those same bedtime routines that you normally have. If they typically have a bath and then get into their pajamas, brush teeth, and have some stories and some snuggles before they go to sleep, then do all of those same things so that your child feels a little bit more comforted and that they're able to get a good night's rest. And finally, the travel scenario that I am perhaps most often asked about is how to still do Montessori when you are staying with family and friends in their home, in their environment that is not set up for Montessori at all. And logistically speaking, when it comes to the activities that you're packing for your child, when it comes to sleeping arrangements, when it comes to eating and mealtime etiquette, a lot of that is going to look exactly the same as it would when you're staying in a hotel. So we've kind of already discussed how you want to approach that. You might actually have a better time dealing with the sleeping arrangement part of it because you have more flexibility in perhaps like extra blankets or extra mattresses and things like that that maybe your family and friends have available to create something that is like a floor bed for your child in the room that you're staying in. So that can be a good thing in that regard. The hard part comes in with the opinions and ideas of all of the other people that you're staying with. So I've actually already done an entire video on how to get family and friends and spouses on board with Montessori and doing that with your children. And if you have not seen that video, then I will link that in the description box down below. Definitely watch that one. But just to give you a general overview and some tips just for this video that would apply to travel situations, I would say start off always by kind of feeling them out. Try to figure out if they just don't know what Montessori is, or if they're kind of open-minded about it, but they just don't know enough yet. And if they fall into those camps, then definitely educate them first. Just kind of let them see for themselves by your modeling what it is and how it works. And if they ask questions, then provide them with the information that they're asking to help them understand. And I think that you're going to find that they're a lot more receptive to kind of doing things your way while you're there. However, in some families, you might encounter people who don't know what Montessori is and they don't care to know, or they do know and they completely disagree with it, and they're just gonna go about their ways that they have been set in and the way that they parented and what they know and feel comfortable with, and they're just going to poo-poo everything that you're doing as this newfangled parenting technique. And so if you find yourself in that situation, I would still try to educate, but you don't want to push it. You don't want to go overboard to the point that they're becoming annoyed by it, because that's just not cool. So if that happens and you're finding that your friend or your in-laws or whomever is just completely stepping on your toes about everything, and you know, they're heaping endless amounts of praise on your child when you don't normally do that at home. You typically focus on encouragement and feedback, or they're trying to feed your child at the dinner table when they are completely capable of feeding themselves. If you find yourself in these really uncomfortable situations that you aren't okay with, you're the parent. It is perfectly okay to speak out respectfully, but speak out and say something and voice your opinion. And perhaps that might pave the way for a conversation later that night, maybe after your child's in bed, when you can get into it a little bit more deeply and really try to get to the root of why it is that you have chosen Montessori for your parenting style. And you might be pleasantly surprised. Maybe after that kind of a conversation, they might be willing to kind of take a step back a little bit and not do what they were doing, or maybe even try some of the things that they see you doing. They might be more open-minded. But then again, they might not. They might not care at all, no matter what you have to say, and just keep on going about whatever it is that they were doing. And so if you find yourself in that situation, I really urge you to take heart. Your child is very resilient. I've said that several times already in this video. They understand that certain people interact with them in a certain way, and that you interact with them in a different way. And if you're concerned that they don't understand that, then you can take your child aside and you can explain that to them. If they're old enough to listen to you and have a conversation with you, you can explain that to them. You know, if you're trying to provide your child with the freedom to go up and down the stairs, for example, at the house, and your mother-in-law rushes in and is just freaking out that you are doing something so dangerous, or they grab your child and pull them off the stairs against their will and say, you're too little to climb on the stairs, go play over here, and kind of shoo them away, which you would obviously never do in your own home. If that kind of thing is happening, then talk to your child about it. Just explain it very respectfully and kindly, and just say, you know, Grandma was really concerned that you were gonna hurt yourself, and that's why she took you off the stairs. When we get home tomorrow, or when we get home next week, don't worry, you can go up and down our stairs at home as much as you want and get all your practice there. My only caveat to that would be, if your child is very clearly becoming upset by a situation because it is so different from what normally happens at home, at that point, your child needs an advocate, and you are your child's advocate. It is your job to step in and make sure that you are helping your child to voice his feelings, not necessarily in a confrontational way, but more of like from a sports casting approach, and kind of voicing what you can clearly see is going on in your child's mind, or what you're hearing your child say. You're interpreting for your child to that friend or a family member in a way that they can understand, that doesn't feel like you're coming at them, basically. So an example of that would be if you're home for the holidays, there's a big family celebration happening, and you have some family members who you haven't seen in a very long time coming to see your child, and and they're really excited and they come in and they're expecting all the hugs and the kisses in the world from your child, and your child doesn't want to hug or kiss them because they haven't seen them in a long time. They're not really on those kind of friendly terms and they don't understand that social etiquette at all yet. It really is the most respectful thing to say, Aunt Linda hasn't seen you in so long. She really wants to give you a hug. Would it be okay if she gave you a hug? And if your child says yes and goes and gives Aunt Linda a hug, then great. But if your child at all kind of recoils or looks shy or says no, or in any way uses body language that you interpret to mean they're not comfortable with it, then you can say to Aunt Linda, it looks like he really does not want to give a hug right now, but I'm sure he'll be ready a little bit later once he's warmed up a little bit. And I think that any well-meaning adult would understand that when it's framed in that perspective. So this brings me back to my very first point at the start of the video. You need to be flexible. Do not stress about it, because for your child, this is a blip in time. You see it on a much larger scale because you are so invested in it and you're thinking about the past and the future, but children live in the present. They live in the here and now. And so yes, things might be happening differently right now, but after they get home and things go back to normal again, then that's their new here and now, and things go back to the way they were. And so it's not really a big deal at the end of the day, and I don't want you to stress about it. All right, so those are my tips for all of you Montessori parents out there who are traveling with your little ones and hoping to maintain your Montessori-ness while you are on the road. If you have any tips or advice of your own, please feel free to share them in the comments with us down below so that the rest of us can benefit from them. And if you are interested in learning more about how to do Montessori at home with your children, I also offer a comprehensive e-course that walks you through it step by step. So I will be sure to leave a link in the description box down below in case you are interested in learning more about it. And just in case you are new to my channel, I also wanted to let you know that this video is part of a much larger series on this YouTube channel called Montessori at Home, which is aimed at providing practical tips and advice for busy parents like you and I for implementing Montessori philosophies at home with your children. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in watching more of, then you might consider subscribing to my channel. This way you don't miss a new video, because I do upload a new one just like this one every single week. Thank you so much for watching today, and I'll see you next time.